There is an unintentional bit of political commentary buried in the verbiage of many high fantasy settings. On the human side, the goodies side, we usually have the King of Gondor, the King of Narnia, the King of Alefgard, and so on. In the European tradition, being the king of a place usually means you rule the lands as a divine monarch and answer only to God. But for all the dubious non-humans, there's a Queen of the Elves, King of the Demons, Emperor of the French. Sovereigns of peoples, not places. Being a king of a people means one is a popular or national monarch, who in some abstract is committed to the protection of the people, not the land. To those of us who live in modern states, it may sound like a petty distinction, but the first thrust of the French Revolution was to change Louis XVI and all those who would follow him from the divine King of France to the temporal King of the French. You could say this choice of title creates the impression that the humans of Middle-earth or the Forgotten Realms have more primitive governance, with despotic divine right feudalism, while the demons and dwarves have advanced to national identities and popular monarchs. And this brings us to the anime Maoyu OST, which opens on the chosen hero preparing to slay the Demon King, King of the Demons, and end the human-demon war. But he finds not a fearsome warlord, but a generously proportioned popular monarch with little appetite for violence. The title of king is traditional, you see, and she dares not change it with her limited political capital. We'll just refer to her with the Japanese Mao. Mao asks the hero to join her, not to conquer the world, but to end the war, revolutionize society, and perhaps later, in bed. He refuses because the demons blackened the sky, poisoned the crops, and possessed human officials to do evil deeds. Mao retorts that's simply the kind of environmental collapse you'll get if you cut all the trees for charcoal and rotate crops incorrectly. Never mind how convenient it is for mundanely corrupt politicians to claim demons made them do it. She then presents her treatise on how this costly, bloody war nonetheless sustains an economic and political system whose sudden end would collapse societies, while a decisive surrender by either side would lead to horrific colonial subjugation. The chosen hero of each generation is ludicrously overpowered and has killed the Demon King many times before, yet the conflict continues. Racism is the one thing immune to total destruction magic. But if the hero would work with her, they can detangle the conflict, break this endless cycle of war, and make it truly the final fantasy. If this sounds like a lot of dry exposition, the direction and presentation of this anime is actually quite sophisticated, dialogue being paced by some neat animation effects and asides. The hero's party mourn his disappearance in the snowy wastes. Noblemen celebrate the wealth and political unity brought by war in a distant court. A serf and little sister escape the destruction of their house and family. With a soft acoustic accompaniment and desaturated art, I might describe the experience with words like classy, even if the show sometimes goes out of its way to make me sound like a lunatic for doing so, both with cheap animation and over-animation. If you've been around the anime block a few times, you might be wondering by now whether Maoyu is actually going to hold a premise, or if it's just going to become some generic anime in 3 episodes. And I am pleased to report that after these two get hitched, they actually do go out to an estate in a backwater village, and spend the better part of the show developing the local economy and making undercover political maneuvers. But there is something that makes this series more than Spice and Wolf Fat Fucking Titties edition. When our leading lady is about to be executed by the church for witchcraft, she defends herself in a particular way. This all begins when Mao finds a pair of fugitive serfs hiding in her stables. Her bodyguard, the head maid, would turn them over to the slave catchers to not step on any toes, but is more sympathetic once the runaways stop groveling like insects and assert themselves like human beings. She gives them jobs as maids, just as women would escape serfdom in the Russian Empire. But more importantly, the elder maid sits on classes Mao is teaching for the local sons of the nobility, in exciting new fields like science and economics. You see, through some magical means, the Demon King's library contains knowledge from across time and space. She possesses theories and technology from the future. If she can build new tools, educate the children, and feed the people with potatoes, the human world will take notice of her, start listening to her and her new ideas. This may sound familiar. 100 isekai stories starting with a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, going back in time and wowing everyone with your high school education and hundreds of hours in Crusader Kings. Saving lives with elementary germ theory, destroying corrupt churches, collecting a harem who don't know what bras or birth control are, making the savages fear and bow down to your gunpowder and electricity. But Maoyu is a bit different, because the human world is a developed society, if a malformed one, and the objective is not to conquer or win a war, but to advance this society into a new economic structure. Despite her humble origins as a serf, the maid is a quick study, and soon enough, with the help of a magical disguise, can stand in for Mao in business dealings when she is off on Demon King business. But perhaps she feels she is just riding on generosity and not asserting herself as a human being like she is supposed to. Because when the Church of the Light Spirit comes around to execute the heretic who is disrupting their ideological racket and Mao is out of town, the maid is ready to face a witch hunt, even if the hero could save her at any time. She has to assert that she is a human and that all humans were created free and equal, with a right to shape their own destiny. You see, it's not that Mao is speedrunning the Industrial Revolutions. She's speedrunning the Enlightenment. By the Enlightenment, I don't mean that in this moment I am euphoric, though I am an amateur quote maker. I mean the period in the 17th and 18th century of dramatic intellectual acceleration in Europe. The scientific method, fundamental rights of man, social contracts and capitalism superseding divine right and mercantilism. Today we might think of these ideas as rather passé, that progress only comes from coal, iron, and whatever fetishized acts of violence against perceived elites. But you have to grok that it was no small advancement for people to realize that the governed must consent and that wealth comes from economies rather than piles of gold. It was the milieu of the American and French revolutions, after all. Mao gives away crops and compasses, but what ends up tipping the scales when the corn and potato chips are down is the ideas of the future. There is a reason she commissions the construction of a printing press before the production of muskets. The climax of the anime is incited by interweaving grain price manipulation schemes of derivatives trading and custom policy. And Mao's students who have taken her humanist, empiricist ideas to heart each become major players in their own right. One thing that makes the Enlightenment parallel even stronger is that atheism is conspicuously absent. Every character is some variety of believer, as everyone from Burke to Robespierre once was. On the hero's suggestion, they found a new church to compete with the old corrupt one, as all people should be able to commune with the light spirit as they see fit. A writer not working from the historical philosophical context, or someone who fetishizes the simplistic machines and steel development fable, would be liable to insert the cringiest anti-theist screeds into their work, regardless of whether that makes sense in a fantasy setting with verifiable gods, or is in good taste. But on the subject of good taste, we can no longer ignore the jiggling elephants in the room. I realize I'm speaking in heady, reverent terms about the intellectual inspiration of a show which primarily attracts its audience with depictions of terrific gazongas. I will admit to being a regular cheerleader of Tono Mamare's work, but it's jarring how his juvenile sense of humor and aesthetics clashes with his intricate plotting and high idealism. A main character this obnoxiously virginal just doesn't fit into a series where everyone is meant to be an adult. And it's not just fan service. You'll notice I haven't named any characters so far in this video, it's just the Demon King, the hero, the maid, and that's because they don't have names. I assume out of some writer's block for naming, every character is simply referred to by job title, like the names of medieval peasantry taken to the logical extreme, which sometimes gives proceedings an off-putting mechanical vibe. Neil Stephenson was allowed to name his main character hero protagonist and didn't go to prison. Now everyone thinks they can get away with murder. Sometimes, the characterization and even the titillation in this series manages to come across as mature as one would hope. One episode opens with the hero and the knight, who is presumably the main girl in the hypothetical anime about their bygone days in an adventuring party. They have a cool mock battle and then cool off by bathing together. It's clearly meant to be sexy, but it feels convincingly intimate, especially as the hero opens up about how he feels everyone has outgrown him, having found roles in society beyond violent force. This sequence feels like a real romance which is happening with the characters, not just a peep show for the audience, with a camera angle of a bust while the hero looks the other way. And it helps that the romantic subplot is eventually resolved. Yes, this virgin forming a ménage à trois with these two beauties is absurd wish fulfillment, but we're grading on an anime curve here. These two are the only women in the show treated as romantic prospects, and he doesn't own slaves. If everyone is of age and having a good time, I think it's acceptable for authors to put their ideal partners in their work, especially if I too would want to impregnate them in the back of a Nissan Altima. For all its missteps, there really aren't many anime out there like Maoyu. It's a clever and thoughtful series that looks at familiar material from a novel perspective. It's not just about the power of friendship, it's about the fundamental rights of man and woman. It's not about money, it's about the wealth of nations. The anime only covers roughly the opening third of the light novels, but there are 3 separate manga adaptations out there, though only one is fully translated to Angloese. The art isn't the best, but the story manages to remain twisty and fun as it goes on. For instance, every premise like this has to have the moment where a bunch of hot-blooded warriors encounter firearms for the first time, but usually, it doesn't happen to the good guys. This series generally gets my mental gears turning, which is why I find it enjoyable, and if you've watched this video so far and like the ideas, it will probably do the same for you, provided some tolerance for anime bullshit. I mean, you could just listen to Revolutions instead, or read a few good economic history books, but those are considerably lacking in fights with giant walrus men and copious cheesecake. Have a good one.